Hi, everyone. My name is Alexander, and I'm privileged to host Solved Technology Insights episode. Our guest today is Andrey, Partner Development Manager at Google. Andrey, pleasure to have you here.
Hi, Alexander, and thanks so much for having me on. It's really exciting to be able to have the chance to speak to your audience today about the Privacy Sandbox, and I think it's going to be definitely an interesting experiment for all of us. So I'm looking forward to the kind of questions we get after this.
Great, thanks, Andrew. 2024 is a pivotal year for entire web ecosystem. Multiple tools, services, and platforms that we know rely on third-party cookies. This year, Chrome aims to fundamentally change how these are treated. Let's talk about cookieless web and what it means today.
Let's indeed, right? Let me start by sharing a little bit of background with you. With your permission, I'll share my screen and we can see if there we go. Hopefully you can all see my screen now. So hi again, this is me, Andrey. You got a few ways to get in touch with me afterwards if you want to ask some questions. But fundamentally, we're here not to talk about me, but rather about the substance. Although, if just in the interest of you understanding why am I talking to you, as Alexander mentioned, I'm a strategic partner development manager at Google, but more specifically on the Privacy Sandbox team. So it is my job to explain and help along both individual companies, organizations, but also the ecosystem at large to understand the implications of the Privacy Sandbox initiative and to respond to it effectively, efficiently, and in a way that leads you to a successful future on the web, you and all of us fundamentally. No. Right, so we'll cut this, right, but we'll start here. So pick up. Before we dive in, let's just do a brief recap of what we know about cookies in general. It all started back in 1994 when they were created by a web programmer at Netscape Communications called Lou Montulli. And many of you probably know this, although some of you might have never thought about it very much. But cookies are part of what transformed web into what is sometimes, I don't think very often anymore, is called Web 2.0. And some of you who are a little bit closer to my generation might have still remembered it being a big deal when we started referring to 2.0. But I think the way I simplified it in my head, all it fundamentally meant is what we are so used to now. When the web became interactive and responsive, when you could move beyond just passively consuming text and maybe images on a screen to actually being able to interact with it. But being able to interact with a piece of text, even just a piece of text, never mind something more complex like shopping, meant that you needed to save state, right? The server needed to remember where you as a user were in the journey when you came back, right? Fundamentally, essentially. And while there's different ways to do it, Lou at Netscape Communications came up with cookies as a concept. And that just transformed everything that we could do. All of a sudden, because you could save sessions, you could have identity, you could come back to your shopping cart, you could do all sorts of exciting things. And if you believe it, it's been 30 years. It is scary to say that. It was 1994. It's been 30 years. And over the past 30 years, cookies have proven to be so useful that we've been piling up functionality on top of them nonstop, pretty much. And now we're really at the stage where we need to reimagine how web pages can continue doing all the amazing stuff that we love them for, but without relying on cookies quite so much, because as we got to find out, cookies are a very simplistic mechanism, and they were not created with everything that we're using them for in mind back then, and therefore without any of the protections that are expected now for, in our context today, most importantly, privacy concerns. Importantly for you, so you don't get fully lost after the talk is over, most of what we cover today is covered at goo.gl/cookie countdown or goo.gl/3pcd. 3pcd is something you'll hear quite a lot about. It basically stands for third-party cookie deprecation. So all the developer documentation starts at that link. Please make sure to grab the QR code, copy the link, just bookmark it. This will be your place to come back to. Now, since I mentioned third-party cookie deprecation, let's remind ourselves what we mean by third-party cookies. Third-party implies a different organization. We don't necessarily mean that here. What we really mean, and what we should probably have called this, but too late now, is cross-site cookies. So cookies set or sent by a different site, right? So for the purposes of our conversation, for the purposes of the Privacy Sandbox and third-party cookie deprecation, cookies from a different site are third-party. The deprecation, in short, is happening now. Right? There's an extended timeline with a few caveats, and some of you might have heard before, like if you heard about cookie deprecation in Chrome, you might have heard about it being delayed, for example. I hear a lot of people bring that up. In reality, it was only delayed once, but now it's definitely in full swing and already happening. So it's already happened for 1% of the users, which we're calling the testing phase. At the end of the testing phase, there will be an evaluation phase. So it is possible that at the end of that testing phase, it might be decided that we need a bit more extra time. But at the moment, all the indications are that we will successfully complete the entire process by the end of this year, 2024. By the end of 2024, cross-site cookies will no longer be supported in Chrome. And before we get to very briefly to the 4 main steps you need to take as a site owner, site manager, front-end developer, product owner, I want to emphasize also maybe 2 important things. One is that third-party cookie deprecation is only one element of the Privacy Sandbox. So I highly encourage you to check out privacysandbox.com to find out what else is changing in Chrome in terms of privacy-preserving technologies, both in terms of what's going away and in terms of what's coming in. If you remember one thing, cookies are not the only thing that is being affected. Check it out. And the second thing is that while we find it useful as a shorthand to talk about third-party cookie deprecation, I've already mentioned that third-party can be a little bit misleading. It might be more useful for you to think about cross-site. And we say deprecation, but it might also be a little bit misleading because it's not complete and full deprecation of the mechanism. First of all, also within that, let's unpack it a little bit. It's not all cookies, it's only cross-site cookies. First-party cookies continue to operate like they always have. So that's nice. Then, even cross-site cookies, it's not like they're fully discontinued. There will be new mechanisms allowing you to continue to rely on cross-site cookies, but with limitations or with some additional work. 2 quick examples there. There's the concept of partitioning. It's been around for a while. I think Firefox were the first ones to introduce it. In Chrome, the API or the solution for it is like a cookie attribute, basically, is referred to as chips, cookies having independent partition states. So cookie partitioning allows you to still rely on third-party cookies, but you have to partition them to a pair between the source and the origin where they're used. And another way that third-party cookies or cross-site cookies will continue to be in use is using a mechanism that in Chrome is called related website sets. So I won't go into too much detail on it. You can look it up. But essentially, again, we will keep talking about third-party cookie deprecation, but you should understand that when we say third-party, we mean cross-site. And when we say deprecation, it's deprecation in most contexts, but there still remain contexts where they will continue to be available. And it's important to remember this because it's actually part of what we're talking about today. It's not just the cookies are going away, but what do you need to do about it to continue being effective in your front-end development and product development? Now, coming back to the things that you need to do. Most essentially, understand what is going on with your site or service. I've been working on this project for several years now. And from the very first day up until today, the main pattern is when we first take a look at anybody's site with the site's owner or some accountable person, they are mainly surprised. Surprise is the first reaction. People are mainly surprised and they don't expect to find the cookies that they find there. So I don't blame you. I certainly encourage you and I fully support you when you first take a look at your site and be surprised by the cookies that you find there. So the first step is definitely understanding what is it that you're doing. If you want more information on tooling and advice guidance available for that, check out go.gl/3pcd-audit. You can see blocked cookies as issues in Chrome DevTools, so that's helpful during the audit. And we also now have a Chrome DevTools extension. You can grab it at the Chrome Web Store. It's called Privacy Sandbox Analysis Tool. And what it allows you to do, right? So you can grab it from the Web Store. The link is on the screen, or you can grab it directly from its GitHub repo. It's open source, so you can both file issues there and contribute to it. Once you've grabbed it, first of all, I mean, it operates like any normal Chrome extension. You have a little new menu that allows you to quickly highlight a few issues straight from your main Chrome menu bar. But also you get a new section in your Chrome DevTools called Privacy Sandbox, where you start getting additional information about the cookies on the page that you're debugging. You need to remember to enable the Chrome DevTools protocol in settings so that it can actually leverage the functionality. I would therefore also recommend that you maybe install this extension in Chrome Canary or something, because the ideal scenario is that you, first of all, you'll have to enable a couple of, well, at least one flag for sure. I'll come back to that in a second, when you're doing any kind of debugging for cookies in the first place. And then also sort of if you enable this extension in a separate version of the browser, it will get less in the way of your regular browser usage. So remember to enable the protocol. Then you get the wealth of data, structured data, most importantly, about cookies on the pages that you visit. It will be reminiscent of the kind of data that you get right now in the applications cookies section of Chrome DevTools, but it will be a lot better structured and enriched. There's some filtering and sorting options allowing you to zoom in. And last but not least, critically important for me, is that you have a command line interface associated with this tool. So you can actually submit sitemaps. And in this case, it can be an arbitrary sitemap. So you can submit any set of URLs as a sitemap for the tool to analyze and come back with a report per URL submitted. So much about the tool. The second point is that you need to not just understand what cookies you have from third parties or anybody's, but also then, is there blockage affecting the functionality of your site or service? More on that at go.gl/3pcd-test. So check that out. But in a nutshell, remember I mentioned the flag? The simplest way to troubleshoot right now or to debug is to run two versions of Chrome in parallel. One with the flag, that the cookie phase out flag that you see on the screen right now, that allows you to simulate or actually replicate the environment where cookies are no longer supported, and one regular version of Chrome with cookies supported. Just by looking at the behavior of the site side by side, you'll, in many cases, just visually be able to identify changes. Where it's a little bit more subtle and a little bit more difficult to identify the changes, make sure you open Chrome DevTools and see the requests coming in, going out, what's blocked, what's not, and what happens, when a request is blocked or not, or a particular cookie is blocked with the request. If you find breakage on your site, any other site you might be browsing, right? Especially if the breakage affecting the site that you are maintaining is not something that you can fix because it is breakage or dependencies coming from, this time actually a third party, like a third party service. I don't know, it could be anything. It could be an embed, it could be a video embed, it could be maps embed, it could be an identity service, a payment service, anything like that. Please report it at go.gl/report3pcbroken, right? Because that will provide invaluable information to the Chrome team and also allow us to start dealing with that. I won't go into too much details like what's available to deal with it, but basically different things, all the way from reaching out to the owners of the service to like creating temporary exceptions and so on. In cases where you are the one running a service, either available commercially or for free as open source, or just available for your own company that relies on third-party cookies, you might want to consider alternative solutions. There might be a wealth of alternative solutions. Like the first, most obvious solution is that you look at the cookies that you're using and you go, well, what happens if I stop using these cookies? And maybe nothing happens. Maybe you had like a set of cookies used a couple of years ago for some sort of A/B experiment, which you don't need anymore. So you just get rid of them and nothing changes. That's the best case scenario. And then it's fine and you finished. More likely, some functionality of your service does depend on available cookies. And then you need to look at what's generally available that's not cookies, including the new APIs, new web APIs, which Chrome is proposing. I've mentioned chips before, right? Which is a bit more, it's not an API, it's just an attribute for cookies, and it has some cross-browser support. Some of the other things that are actually APIs also do have cross-browser support, but not all. So what I would encourage you to do here is if you find one of them or more of them relevant for your case and applicable to you as a solution, but you, for example, you're struggling with the fact that it doesn't have cross-browser support, come into the repository. All of these things have public repositories. voice your concerns about the lack of cross-browser support, and voice your concerns to the other browser vendors other than Chrome, I mean, about needing APIs like this to deal with environments where third-party cookies are not supported, because many browsers have, I hesitate to say most, but probably I would be able to say most browsers are moving in the direction of not supporting and phasing out and disabling and different other things to third-party and cross-site cookies. Not all of them are offering APIs that would support actual valid use cases, anti-fraud, payments, identity management, you name it. Therefore, right, remember, interop is key. So raise your voice and add to it. Otherwise, check out the repositories. If you Google, if you use a search engine of your choice to find any of these names, you'll find them fairly easily. Get into the GitHub repos, read the explainers, look at the issues, see what's going on, leave your own comments, ask for support. Now, where you're in a position where you depend on services provided by others, you can't actually do any development to fix this. So, but there's still a few things you could do. Depending on your position in the company, I mean, if you're responsible for the engineering part, the back end, the front end, maybe it's not up to you to actually deal with this, but maybe it's up to you to raise this issue so others in your company can deal with it. If you are a product owner, then certainly this is within your scope to address. Simple steps you can take to analyze the providers that you have is start with by saying, well, do you even need this service? So you have a third-party service that relies on cookies. What does it do? Who put it there and why is it there? Does it need to be there? Maybe it doesn't, right? If it doesn't, remove it, problem solved by itself. If you still need this service, ask your provider, are they ready to operate without unpartitioned cross-site cookies? If they are there updates you need to download? I'll give you a great example. I hope that's a great example. Anyway, you might have heard about Google Sign-In as a service. Version 2 of Google Sign-In relies on cookies. Version 3, the new version, does not. So Google Sign-In continues to operate perfectly in the new cookieless world, but you need to migrate from version 2 to version 3. And that's just one example. So if there are updates you need to make, download and install, or otherwise integrate, you must check it out and you must be aware of it. If your provider is not ready to operate without cross-site cookies, do you want to work with them, collaborate with them as they pivot? Or do you want to actually consider other available options, right? You might want to think about this whole situation as due diligence. You did due diligence potentially as a product owner when you chose to integrate third-party services. Now you have this additional element of that diligence that you need to do sort of post-factum a little bit. What is the model that the service uses in terms of cookies? Can it operate without them? If not, what other services exist that would fulfill the same need without relying on cross-site cookies? One last thing I wanted to make sure before we get to your questions that you're aware of, the deprecation trials, right? For a limited time, you're able to request Chrome to continue allowing third-party cookie usage for your service or on your site. It's a last resort option available if you've exhausted all the others and need extra time to find a solution. But check out the links going to developer documentation on both of those trials. They'll explain to you exactly what's going on there. Make sure that you remember this option, right? As you are exploring and realizing that maybe you need a bit more time to actually figure out where your dependencies are and what your solutions could be, remember that you have the deprecation trials. So to recap, right? To prepare, you need to audit your third-party cookie usage, test for breakage, where relevant, migrate to the relevant new APIs and other related solutions, and analyze your cookie-based third-party service providers. I think that's it. So I think with that, we could get to your questions.
Thanks, Andrew. From a technical standpoint, maybe you could provide us a more detailed explanation of what the Privacy Sandbox entails.
All right, fair enough. Let's sort of bring us a little bit back to the beginning, which I think is well worth it. The Privacy Sandbox is not in itself a sandbox in the classical developer sense. Like, it's not an environment, it's not a set of tools, or rather, not only an environment, or only a set of tools. It is more a name for an initiative. That's the way you can think about it. The first element that you need to remember is that it affects both Chrome and Android. And the changes inside Chrome and Android, they are conceptually similar, but obviously technologically different. However, both Chrome and Android have adopted the branding of Privacy Sandbox to cover their efforts in improving or enhancing user privacy. So that's number one. I'm more familiar with Chrome, so I keep talking about Chrome from now on. Within Chrome, I would then further split this into two more areas. There's things that are going away. Remember, I mentioned cookies were not the only thing. So, for example, we just talked about in quite some detail about cross-site cookies changing the way they're being handled or being phased out to some extent. But that's not the only thing. IP information, the way it's being handled, is changing. User agent string has already changed. I don't know if any of you noticed. Hopefully, some of you have. Chrome has changed the way the user agent string is shared by default. So it's a lot more constricted now. And these changes, so most of them are documented already on the privacysandbox.com, so check that out. But I would also venture to say that more changes are coming. And in fact, in this evolving user expectations and regulatory landscape, I would expect this to be a continuous process. It's not going to be over this year, next year, some other year. It's going to be an evolving process of addressing new concerns, new ideas, new technologies that have a privacy footprint and responding to that. So definitely be conscious of this element of the initiative. And then the second element of the initiative is new APIs and new solutions that are being proposed. You've seen, I've shown you some examples of them. We talked about them like chips and related website sets in some detail as well. You'll find more about them at privacysandbox.com. Again, key things to remember here. Number one, and the most important, I think it's not recognized enough, these are not replacements for cookies. Nobody is replacing cookies. That would be pointless, because the whole idea is that we said 30 years ago, they were a transformative technology that enabled Web 2.0. Today, we can't rely on something like that. That's why we need new solutions. So we're not replacing cookies. We're thinking about what is the web actually trying to do. I'm not touching Web 3.0, please. If you want to comment about it, please do, but I'm still talking about 2.0. What does the web need to do in terms of identity management, user flow management, checkout, anti-fraud, cybersecurity, all of that stuff? How can it be technologically supported by the browser in a privacy-preserving way, right? So these new solutions are being put forward. And then two things within that the way they're being put forward. All of them are being put forward openly. So first, as proposals on GitHub, open to discussion at the proposal stage. Then, once they're shipped, you're still able to file issues, suggest enhancements, raise concerns, and so on. So it's a fully transparent, open process. GitHub is not the only place where you can discuss it. And for many of us, obviously here or today, probably one of the most familiar platforms. But you have the usual W3C forums, the W3C privacy working group, and so on. There's both platforms like GitHub, which ensure the openness of it, but also recognized web environments like the W3C, where these things are discussed. And more solutions can come in the future. So the list that you will, for example, of the new APIs that you will find on privacysandbox.com right now is not exhaustive. It is quite possible that new APIs can come, or changes to the existing APIs might happen. And I think most excitedly, if you're working in the space and you have ideas and you have proposals of new solutions, you should put them forward. Like, not all of these solutions should keep coming from Chrome, right? That's our greatest ambition, I think, to have the industry actively participate in the suggestion of new privacy-preserving solutions. I hope that covers that.
Thanks, Andrew. And from your perspective, how do you anticipate these changes will impact web services?
Let me be quite frank here. I think the impact can be very dramatic. It has the potential to be very dramatic. If you, especially as a service owner, you're completely blind and unaware of the changes that are happening. So I think the first, most important element here is to raise your own awareness. Again, thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Salt, for inviting me to talk about this today. I believe it's hugely important for us to raise this awareness. Hopefully, those of you listening to us can pass this on. Do the usual things, like, share, subscribe, so that more of your colleagues and friends see this. So once you're a little bit more aware, the risks are already lower. We've also discussed, and I've seen examples where, because cookies are partly because cookies are so easy to use and rely on, people just leave them around like literal cookies. You just kind of take a bite, leave it on the table, and come back to it, and 3 years later it's still there. You don't even know who left it there. It's very similar on the web. So in many cases, while cookies that your service sets or relies on might be phased out, might not even break anything because the service that actually used them is no longer even running. So you can have anywhere from zero impact to cookies being a critical element of the entire service. I think the most classical example of cookie usage is session management, which in turn leads to identity management. So if your whole identity management system, single sign-on, for example, is based on checking cookies for the session state, and that is being done in a cross-site context, right? So you have your site where the user is landing, and you have your identity provider on a separate origin, right? And that's the one setting cookies and checking for them. That model stops working. That could lead to significant consequences, whether it's your own service or whether it's somebody else's service that you're using. So to come back to your original question, the impact can vary from none at all to very significant. And the moment to act is now, to check what that impact is in your particular case and figure out the options to address it.
So, Andrey, what would be the steps to prepare for upcoming changes? Where would one begin?
Look, we covered some of that, I think, today. Let me briefly rephrase and re-emphasize. It depends on the position that you're in, right? In fact, you might be in a bit of both. I've seen examples of that as well, but let's imagine a world where there's two simple positions that you're in. Either you're responsible for a site, right, that runs no services, only relies on other people's services, or you're responsible for an actual service that, in the spirit of the composable web, is the service that ensures the functionality of other sites. If you own a site and you're responsible for the development of a site, the most important place for you to start is the third-party cookies audit. Take a look at what cookies are running, are being set and requested on your site for any given user. We've seen the flags, in the tooling, so use all of that. Make yourself a list, like from A to Z, what's going on? Like, what are the services? Look at the developer documentation. Try to sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. So it's sometimes tricky, but fair enough. Leverage your colleagues and the rest of your teams to do that. Figure out what are they doing, and start basically processing those services one by one, addressing that, like getting rid of them, working with them, whatever. If you yourself are running one of those services, right, and either it comes as a surprise to you that you use cookies, which sometimes also happens, or you're well aware of your use of cookies and you understand how you use them, start looking at the solutions. Now, the first and most obvious alternative solution, for example, is to, you have interesting examples of it. I'll speak to ones that I'm more familiar with. I know that a lot of cybersecurity services, a few analytics services, they provide JavaScript to their customers, which then sets necessary cookies in a first-party context. So while the JavaScript is provided by the third party, and maybe there's even server to client communication going on about the visitor, about some environmental variables, the actual cookie is not being sent across sites. And then everything continues to work. So we still have cookies that are from a third party in a conceptual sense, but they're not set in a cross-site context. They're set in a first-party context. So they will continue to operate. If you can shift your service to that model, go ahead. That's beautiful. That's exactly what we're aiming for, because it's more secure, it's more privacy preserving. Or if that's not an option for you, right? If you're running an identity service, for example, or some payment services might rely on cookies in a particular way, you have these new APIs that we've briefly touched on. You can think about partitioning, but you can also think about storage access API and so on. So consider a new architecture for your service. So now you have an architecture where somewhere in the middle of it, there is a cookie on which everything depends. see what APIs can you replace that cookie with.
Thanks, Andrew. And can you share in what ways can we leverage these changes to enhance the success of web products?
It's my favorite question, right? So thanks for bringing it up, Alex. I think that at least, well, there's two ways to answer it as well. I'll start with the more philosophical, and then I'll promise there'll be a more practical one. So the more philosophical one, I think, is that we are collectively ensuring the successful existence of the web for the foreseeable future by making these changes. So we're sort of collectively ensuring our own existence insofar as we are web enthusiasts and with web developers or web advocates, whatever we are. By making these changes, we're making sure that there is a web for us to work on 5-10 years from now. So that's the fundamental reason to work on this. If you prefer something a little bit more tangible to explain why these changes are needed and why they would help you, your company, your organization in the short run, there will be a period of transition. We are, in fact, not there will be, there is, we are now in this period of transition. And organizations that become more privacy aware and innovate on privacy, right? Don't treat privacy as this, oh my God, it's a headache, it's a regulatory issue, I need to be responsive, I need to be sort of responsive to it in the sense that it comes from the outside and I just need to keep it at bay somehow. Treat this as an innovation opportunity, right? We just mentioned moving away from cookies to new APIs. Don't treat it as replacing a leaking tube with a new one. You're just reimagining how the whole thing operates. You could come up with a completely new concept that is more economical, that is more efficient, that provides eventually a better user experience somehow. You could revolutionize your service. You could stumble across, what is sometimes called a new blue ocean, almost by accident, by saying, okay, wow, just a second. I've almost accidentally, by thinking about this, invented a new way to approach this decades-old problem, whatever it might be, cybersecurity or payments or whatever else it is. And that's an opportunity, like any innovation. It's an opportunity to disrupt, to become the leader of this new approach, and therefore gain market share, gain completely new users, customers, categories, and so on. So remember that we're doing this for the benefit of the whole web, which is the foundation of our long-term success. But as an individual organization, as an individual developer, think about also not just the success of your own organization immediately right now, if you are among the first to make the transition. But as an individual developer, by acquiring the skills to create and maintain services that don't rely on cross-site cookies, you become a very valuable asset, right? Because you will, hopefully not those of you listening to us here will not be surprised, but some of your colleagues might be surprised exactly a few months from now, if not next year, how much in demand engineers and product owners with experience in building products that don't rely on cookies will be when the deprecation is complete and Chrome no longer supports cookies. It will be quite an eye-opening experience for many.
All right, Andrew, I think it was very insightful. Thank you for the interesting discussion and for the tips you provided. And thank you all for watching the episode of Salt Technology Insights. If you liked it and if you find it useful, please don't hesitate to share and like it on social media. And please drop us a line if you would like to know more about the upcoming changes, or you have some other topics in your mind that we may cover in next Salt Technology Insights episode. Thank you so much for watching.